Perfect. All righty, we'll get started then. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. So my name is Damien. I am from the BGL Client Success team that looks after the clients that purchase BGL's cloud-based products and assist with that data transition and onboarding and training experience. Today, we'll be looking at this Infund 360 best practice session. So if any clients have previously attended the session in 2021, so last year, we have changed the format of the series this year. So the first one being this year as well, so in April. We will be looking at each of the features and screens within SimpleFund 360 separately, and then really sort of dive deep into those screens and features. So today's session, we'll be looking at how to get bank data and bank transactions the most efficiently way into SimpleFund 360. So that is quite different as well, depending on how your clients are currently set up and how you may choose to look at making things more efficient. And then in the next couple of webinars, we'll look at getting share transactions into the software and then also how to process an SMSF. So it's going to be more of a series with more in-depth discussion and tips and tricks into how we most efficiently process an SMSF in the software. So just a bit of housekeeping just before we jump into things. So this webinar is being recorded. So all attendees and registrants will receive a copy of the recording and the slides within a few days as well. So if you do need to jump out at any point, that is perfectly fine. You will receive a copy of the recording. If you do have any questions throughout the session, please pop them into the Q&A section of your Zoom console. I do have a couple of colleagues, Brian and Jason, who are monitoring the Q&A and will be happy to help with any of those questions that you do have throughout the session. So as I mentioned before, so what we're looking to cover today is getting the bank transactions into SimpleFund 360. So one of the common questions that a lot of people at BGL receive from clients is, what is the most efficient way of getting bank transactions into the software? We still see sometimes clients that are manually entering in transactions, maybe because that's what they've done in SimpleFund Desktop in the past, or they find that most efficient, but there are easier ways where you can save time with getting bank transactions into the software. So I've got on the screen at the moment the three most efficient ways in order as well. So the first one is the BGL Bank Data Service. So if your firm has been using the BGL Bank Data Service, that's great. You'll be able to see some of the other features and you might learn some new things. We have made some improvements to the service over the past couple of years in particular as well. So that is the most efficient way. And we're going to go through that process of how to set up the Bank Data Service, what the costs are involved with that add-on, and how all of that works. But we're still going to also look at how we can get data in other ways other than the BGL Bank Data Service as well. So we're going to look at the Smart Docs side of things, which is importing bank transactions directly from a bank statement into the software as well. And then also how to import a CSV into SimpleFund 360 as well. So just looking at the Bank Data Service first. So this is the automated, so just as a bit of a background. So with the bank transactions, whenever the clients are trading or doing things related to the SMSF, all of those bank transactions that occur with their bank accounts, those bank transactions that occur would flow through to SimpleFund 360 directly. So it wouldn't require you to enter in that transaction or import that transaction into the software. It would be a live data feed, especially even, for example, today's date as well. So even though many accountants are currently processing the 2021 financial year, I guess the clients themselves, the trustees, don't wait for that. They'll still do their normal trading as normal. So all of those bank transactions are what would still come through into the software. And if you're doing daily processing as well, that's great. You've got all of those transactions without having to request it from the client on an often like regular basis. So with the BGL Bank Data Service, just a bit of background about how it works and the cost side of things. So this is an add-on to your SimpleFund 360 license. So it's not included in the base price. It is an additional add-on. The cost of the BGL Bank Data Service is $40, excluding GST, per fund per annum. Okay, so if you're on monthly billing, this can definitely also be added onto your subscription as well. So this is an optional add-on as well. So we're going to go through the benefits and how the service works. So if the BGL Bank Data service is taken up, there is a minimum of 5 funds to subscribe for. And then upgrades will be in increments of 1 fund thereafter. So similar to the base funds as well, where if the service is taken up, minimum 5 funds and then singles afterwards. So if you have, for example, 20 funds, or I guess even more sort of different number, if you have 19 funds that you want to set up on the BGL Bank Data service, that's perfectly fine. You can pay for those 19 funds. You don't have to pay for 20 or in blocks like you may have in the past. If you're currently subscribed to the BGL Bank Data service, that's great. You'll be able to access it within the software, and we'll go through how you can set up those bank data feeds. If not, you can upgrade your license through your My BGL Administration Center. So your firm's BGL account owner or anyone else that does have access to My BGL, which is the administration center for your BGL products, you will be able to access that from the app switcher within your software directly. So with the supported banks, just moving on to the next one. So on the slide here, I've got at the moment the 16 banks that we do currently support through the BGL Bank Data service. So you'll notice that the main big 4 banks, so ANZ, CBA, NAB and Westpac are definitely supported as part of the BGL Bank Data service. I've got Macquarie in there as well because they're quite another big bank with a lot of SMSFs that have bank accounts with them. But we do still support some of the other banks as well that are quite common. So I've got a list of them on the screen at the moment. And on the slide before, I did also have the link that has the supported banks and also the type of accounts that are also supported. So for example, term deposits or loan accounts, some banks do support them, some don't. But most of the common bank accounts, like everyday sort of accounts for SMSFs, are supported through the BGL Bank Data service. So if you do have any sort of clients that have banks with any of these, definitely worthwhile looking at setting up the data feeds for them. So just going to go through a bit of more background as to what does the process involve with getting the bank data service set up. We'll look at a couple of other questions that you may have about the BGL Bank Data service, and then also jump into the software, and we'll go through that process a little bit more in depth as well. So the first part of the process with the BGL Bank Data service is to generate an authority form. So now is a really good time to be generating those authority forms, which is why we've got this webinar scheduled in for this particular time. So with those authority forms, we've got here, it does need to be physically signed by the client with a wet signature. Okay, so it does need to be physically signed, not digitally signed. Okay, so most of the banks actually don't unfortunately accept digital signatures. So it does need to be physically signed. Now, I guess we've also received a number of queries from clients, especially over the last couple of years with the pandemic. What's the most efficient way for clients to sign off on the authority forms if you don't see them on an often basis, for example? So a couple of suggestions with getting these authority forms signed, whether it's yourself or maybe involving your admin team as well. There's a couple of different options. The first one is either to maybe print out the authority form from the software and mail it to the client. So some clients don't have a printer. So if they don't have a printer, it makes it a little bit more tricky for the client themselves to sign that authority form. But if you have provided them with a copy of that authority form in paper, all they need to do is sign it and then return that authority form back to yourself as the accountant. Another option as well is if the client is coming to yourself to review the financials and you've got them in front of you, you can also get them to sign that authority form at the same time. So they're already in the mood to be signing off on the financial statements for example, the 2021 financial year that's due in a few weeks' time. So it's probably also a good opportunity for you to discuss the BGL Bank Data service with them at that point, and also get them to sign off on the bank authority form at the same time. So they're already in that mood to sign. So it's another good opportunity to get that included in there as well. Now, once the authority form has been signed by the client, it is then returned to yourself as the accountant. So you'll be able to keep a copy of this one on your records as well. And then what happens is that form is uploaded into Simple Fund 360 directly. Okay. So with the authority form, you can take a photo of that or even scan a copy of the bank form as well. Okay, so even though the form does need to be physically signed by the client, a scanned copy or taking a photo of it and sending that back, if the client was to take a photo of it and send it back to you, that's perfectly fine. So as long as the form is able to be read by the bank for approval, that is perfectly fine. So for example, the account number, so the BSB and account number, and also the signatures, those are the two most important things, and just making sure that the form is able to be read, basically. So what happens is once the client has signed it, it is uploaded back into Simple Fund 360 as well. In the past, you may have emailed those authority forms to our data services team, which is definitely also still possible, but we've made it easier where you can now upload them directly into the software as well. So it gives you a quicker response time without having to wait for the data services team to get back to you to confirm that it has been sent to the bank. So what happens at that point is that BGL will then send that authority form to the financial institution or the bank for approval. The approval process itself takes about 10 to 15 business days. And that's why it's important that you look at this part of the process now. Okay, so we'll touch on it shortly, but what you will also notice is that many of the banks will only provide the bank transactions from the approval date. Okay, so most of them will provide it from the approval date only. So what that means is that you want to be setting yourself up in a position now to get these authority forms generated, signed by the client, and also sent back to the banks over the next sort of few weeks or the month or so. Because what that will mean is that from July 1, as long as everything's been completed and the bank has approved the authority form, that the bank data will flow in from July 1 continuously into the future as well. So you're not going to have a gap otherwise. So if, for example, you look at this part of the process in early June, and the financial year can be quite busy for everyone, including the banks. So if the bank doesn't approve it for a little bit longer until for example, the middle or the end of July, depending on when they have received the authority form, it will mean that you have a gap in your data. So the month of July won't have any data in there. Okay, so it's just one thing to keep in mind, that it's important to jump onto this process now, especially with the 2021 financial year being due and that tax return being lodged in the next sort of few weeks or so. Now, once the authority, the bank has provided the authority, the bank transactions will flow through to the funds in Simple Fund 360 directly as well. So a couple of other sort of frequently asked questions that we do receive from our clients in relation to the BGL Bank Data Service. Just going to add a couple of things just before I jump into these ones that I do have on the slides as well. Now, with the costing that we looked at before, so with the cost of the BGL Bank Data Service, you can pick and choose which funds are set up for the BGL Bank Data Service. Okay, so let's say, for example, you have 45 funds that you administer and process the SMSFs for, and maybe 30 of them have a lot of transactions that you do want to receive those bank feeds for, or the clients want you to have that daily processing. You can set up 30 funds on the BGL Bank Data Service and pick and choose which 30 funds that you would like to do, but still also have the remaining 15 funds in your license. Okay, so this is a very flexible model where you are able to pick and choose which funds are set up for the BGL Bank Data Service as well. Now, any funds that are set up on the BGL Bank Data Service as well, you can have unlimited bank accounts. Okay, so if a fund has one bank account, it will take up one spot in your BGL Bank Data Service license. If it has 2, 3, 5, or 10 bank accounts, it still takes up one spot in your license. So it's really important to sort of maximize that efficiency as well with your bank accounts and those clients, and consider which ones do require the bank feeds to be flowing through into Simple Fund 360. So the first thing is obviously looking at which bank accounts the client has and seeing just to double check and make sure that they are supported. But as I said, unlimited bank accounts and unlimited transactions as well. So it doesn't matter how frequently the client processes transactions with their bank accounts and does transactions. There's no limit to those. And we do also receive a balance for most of those banks as well. So the bank balance helps to reconcile and make sure that all the transactions are in Simple Fund 360 as well. So it's a really good way. It's not just the collection or the flowing of those bank transactions into the software. It's still also that benefit of having it live without having to wait for your client to sign to provide you with the bank transactions. So you can see them in live time. Even though if you're processing a previous financial year, you can still see any transactions from the last few days, for example, within the fund. And there's no sort of limit to the number of bank accounts as well. Now, a couple of other questions that we do also receive. So which banks provide historical data? Okay, so there are 3 of those 16 banks that do provide historical data. Macquarie is one of them, which is the most common one that we do see outside of the big 4 banks. A couple of other small institutions as well, so DDH Graham and Rabobank as well, do also provide historical transactions as well. Okay, so it is just those 3 banks. And just to reiterate that again, that is why it's important to make sure that we look at this part of the process with getting those bank feeds set up now rather than later. Okay, so that we have the full data feed starting from July 1 or earlier as well. Just to mention it again, so scanned copies of the authority form is fine. So you can take a photo of the authority form. They can send it back. The client can send it back to you via mail. They can scan it and send it to you via email. All of those sort of options are fine, just as long as those details on the authority form, including the signature, are readable when it is uploaded into the software. Now, one other thing to also note with the signing of the authority forms is that it's important to make sure that the client signs it as if they were at the bank. Okay, so it does need to have the full signature. So we've seen in the past a few sort of clients that do, for example, put their initials on the authority form. Okay, so if the banks, on the bank's end, if they have the full signature without any initials, for example, on there, that's the signature that needs to be entered in or signed by the client. So not the abbreviated version or anything like that, the full version, whichever one is on the bank's end. The banks do actually check to make sure that it is the correct signature and matches their records. So it is important to make sure that the signature on the authority form matches the bank's record. If there is an issue with that, the form is likely to be unfortunately rejected, which the data services team will communicate with yourself as the accountant. So it is important to make sure that we don't delay the process and that clients sign the authority forms correctly as well. Just to reiterate again, that timeframe is 10 to 15 business days, so about 2 to 3 weeks typically. But again, keeping in mind the end of financial year can be busy at times. So jumping onto that process now is very important as well. Now, just before we jump into this as well, so if you've got funds that are set up on the with Macquarie as well. So with Macquarie, Macquarie does provide an ESI service free of charge as well. So with that, this is outside of the BGL Bank Data Service. There's no charge of that $40 if a fund is set up for ESI. We won't be going through ESI today, but if that is the case, there isn't additional charges for funds set up with Macquarie ESI. Perfect. All right, so we'll jump into Simple Fund 360 and we're going to go through and set up the authority form and generate an authority form for a bank account. So just bear with me for one moment. Perfect. Alrighty. So I've just jumped into Simple Fund 360 here at the moment. I've just got a test environment open. I'm just going to also stop my video so that you've got the full screen at this point, and also for the recording as well. Perfect. So hopefully everyone is able to see Simple Fund 360 up on the screen at the moment. So I'm just going to go through this process. I know we've gone through a lot of steps and the process involved. So we're just going to repeat that and do it within the actual software now as well. So currently I am in the feed management screen already. To access what we call the feed management screen, you would go into the connect menu on the left-hand side and then select feed management to access this one here. Now, within the feed management screen, so this has also been recently updated within the last couple of years as well. So definitely a bit of a change in that process here. If it's been a while since you have looked at the screens, they were separated in the past, but we've made it nice and concise, and the ability to create more filters and see that information within the one spot as well. Now, if you are logged into or currently working on a particular fund, that is the fund that will appear in what we call the entity summary tab in the feed management screen. So what that means is that it will show you the bank feeds, shared data, and RAS and platforms, any sort of data feeds that you have set up within the one area so that you can see it holistically as well. So for this particular one, we can see the bank feed set up here at the moment. So we've got 3 bank accounts that are set up in this particular fund. And on the right-hand side here, we can see the statuses of these ones as well. Now, one other thing to also note is if you want to see how many funds have been set up for the BGL Bank Data Service, or if you are currently subscribed to the service as well, you can see these details from the feed management screen in the top right-hand corner here. So for example, in this one, I can see I've got 22,000 subscription for my funds, and I've just used the one, which is the one that I'm actually working on at the moment here. If I click on the arrow here, I can see further details about those data feeds and the services that have been taken up. So I can reconcile those numbers here too. Now, if I want to generate a report to see which funds have been set up with the bank data service, or even the share data as well, you can go into the advanced options and reports and then generate, for example, the bank report, bank feed report, or license report here, which will detail that information as well. Now, this is the bank account that I've got in this software or in this particular fund, which doesn't have the BGL Bank Data Service set up at the moment. So I can see that from here where it says no feed set up at the moment, and that's how I know it hasn't been done yet. Now, what I do is if I want to set up the Bank Data Service, I can click on the option here to edit the record. And then from here, I can see the account name and bank details, the BSB and account number. These would have flown through from the chart of accounts as well. So just double checking to make sure that also these details obviously match what is on the bank's records and the client's actual details as well. And what happens from here is that with the feed provider itself, we click on this option here and then select the BGL Bank Data Service. Now, by doing this, we can see a few other options have opened up down the bottom here. The first one is the print form. So when I click on this, what will happen is that Simple Fund 360 will generate an authority form for the bank account that we're working on. And we can see all of those details have been populated automatically as well in this example. Now we can see, for example, in here as well, so we've got the fund name that we're working on, the BSB and account number as well. The account signatory and those details down the bottom here would also be produced. I don't actually have a trustee added in the fund at the moment, but these details would be automatically populated as well. So it's a very easy process to simply just generate the authority form and then get the client to sign off on this one. Okay, so printing it and the client's physically signing that authority form as part of the process. Now, a couple of other things as well as part of this process. So with the print letter, so this is more of a cover letter as well. So it just details what the BGL Bank Data Service is and a little bit more information that the client can refer to about what more of the security side as well, because sometimes clients might be a little bit worried about the bank data and what they're actually authorizing. So this particular cover letter details what the Bank Data Service is and what they are actually authorizing as well. Now, a couple of other things to also note with this as well, and there are some additional security documents that you can provide to your clients. One thing to note is that the clients are not adding authority for either BGL or yourself as the accountant to act on their account. That is not the case. What they are authorizing is for the financial institution to send the read-only data to BGL. Okay, so that's the one thing to keep in mind, that the client is not giving authority for someone else to act on their behalf as part of this process. Now, another thing to also keep in mind is that with Westpac as well, Westpac do only allow the bank feeds to be set up through internet banking. Unfortunately, they have removed the authority form part of the process from their end. So there isn't an authority form can't be signed for Westpac only. The remaining banks do have an authority form though that would be signed. So a lot of clients may not be able to access the internet banking. So again, if the client's with you in the office and they log into their internet banking, because they shouldn't give you their internet banking details, you would be able to walk them through the process to set up the bank data feeds for a Westpac bank account as well. Now, just a couple of other points as well. So the field that says here, do not import data before. Now, what this means is that particularly for the banks that provide historical transactions, so Macquarie Bank as an example, what we're doing with this is popping in the date that even though the bank provides us with the historical data for for a few of them, we pop in the date here that even though if they send it to BGL, we don't want that data to be received within Simple Fund 360. Okay, so let's say as an example, for this particular fund, the 2020 financial year has been completed. So what we would do is pop in here, for example, 30 June 2020, or even, the 1st of July 2020. 1st of July 2020. What that means is that any transactions before this date would not be received within Simple Fund 360. Okay, so even if BGL receives it, we don't want the fund to receive it. Now, there are a couple of other things, for example, close period and create entries that would also stop the data feeds from being received if it falls into those sort of categories. But this is just a really good habit to get into so that you don't end up with any sort of duplicate transactions as part of the process. So even with this, it means that no transactions before this date would be received within Simple Fund 360. So what I'll do here is I'll click on the Save button, and that has now set up the fund and that bank account with the BGL Bank Data Service. So from here, we can see that it says awaiting signature. Okay, so we can see what that means is we're waiting for the client, the trustees of the bank account and the fund, to sign that authority form. So not yourself as the accountant, it is the trustees of the fund. Now, as part of this process as well, so once the client has signed the authority form and returned it to yourself as the accountant, you'll keep a copy of this on your records, the signed form in the file or on your document management system. And with this signed authority form, so whether it's a photo or whether you have scanned a copy of it, that authority form needs to be uploaded into Simple Fund 360. So to do this, what we would do is click on this paper icon here on the right-hand side in the feed management screen, which will open up the similar screen that we looked at before, and it will have the authority form upload with the drag and drop option here. So from here, what we would do is drag and drop the scanned copy with the signed copy of the authority form back into here and upload that here, and then click on the upload button afterwards. Okay, so once that part of the process occurs, the data services team will do a quick check over it to make sure that it does look good and is ready to go. And then they will send the authority form to the bank for approval. So again, that 10 to 15 business days for approval. And at that point, what will happen is that it will have the send to bank status here, as we do see on the screen for one of my other bank accounts in the fund here as well. Now, again, once the financial institution has approved the authority form, after that 10 to 15 business days, the data feeds will then start in Simple Fund 360, and it will go to the feed operating status that we can see on the screen here. Now, as you would have already seen, there's quite a few different statuses. We've got awaiting signature, we've got send to bank, we've got feed operating. There's actually a couple of other ones as well. So with all of those feed statuses, in the bank feeds global area that I can see here, we can see a more holistic view of all of the entities in the license and all of the bank accounts as well. Okay, so for example, we can see the same sort of details in a couple of the BGL training fund as well. But at the top of the screen, we can see the filters available here too. So I can click on any of these filters over here, and that will allow me to see the funds that have a bank account with that particular status as well. So I can select multiple statuses as well. So if I want to see awaiting signature and ones that may not have been set up yet, you can select those ones from here. There are a number of those filters that you can set up from here. Now, if you do see any bank accounts that say not supported, but you've seen them on the list, just double check to make sure that the BSB and account number details have been entered in. So for example, with this one, it says not supported, but it's because the BSB and account number have not been recorded for that bank account, which is why it's saying not supported. So just double checking to make sure you've got the ability to filter these particular sections and see these additional information. And you can see this workflow happening. So once it has been sent to the bank for approval, we can see the institution pending status and that whole workflow. Now, a couple of other things as well to look at on this screen as well. So if you do want to export this, you can export the view with all the filters out as well. So if I just go with the show all for the moment, what I can do is in the advanced options and reports area, we can also export the current view. Okay, so what that means is all of the information that we see on the screen right now can be exported into a CSV or Excel file if you want to filter and work out which ones do need to be set up. And that works for any of the ones that you do have on the screen. So if I was to change it to awaiting signature and see all the funds that do have that particular status currently, we can go into that area here and export the current view, which will show all of the accounts on the screen as at the time of clicking that button. So it's a really good way if you do want to export information out of Simple Fund 360 that you can go through this process here. Now, just looking at a couple of the other sort of statuses here that we do have on the right-hand side. So just as I mentioned earlier as well, so once the authority form has been sent to the bank for approval, if there's any issues with them, the bank will let BGL know, our data services team know, and then they will advise you directly as well. So you'll see that the status may change to attention, and it may say error, invalid signatory, which may mean, for example, the client wasn't authorized to sign it. There could be multiple reasons, and that's why it's important to make sure that when the data feeds are being set up, that the correct details have been entered in, such as the BSB and account number, and the signature matches the bank's record as well. So those are some of the common reasons why, for the few bank accounts that do get rejected, that those are the common reasons what we do see from the banks. Okay, so making sure those details are correct will make sure that you don't have to bug the client twice and that everything is a most efficient and smooth sailing process. But yeah, if there is any issues, our data services team will update the status so you can see it from within Simple Fund 360, and they will also advise you of those errors and further details as well. Now with the bank data, so once that's just a little bit about how the feed management screen works and that sort of workflow with setting up an authority form, uploading it back into Simple Fund 360, and then also once it is operating, how you can see those statuses as well. Now with the transaction list, so if I go into the transaction list, so we can see from within the transaction list here, the bank transactions that have flown through into the software. Now this happens automatically. You don't need to do, once the bank feeds have been set up, you don't need to do anything extra to receive or trigger the bank feeds to be received within Simple Fund 360. So for any clients that have moved across from Simple Fund Desktop and were using the SIS data service in the past, so you would normally need to do an upload every time you wanted to receive the bank transactions. That doesn't need to occur in Simple Fund 360. Those bank transactions will flow through overnight within 1 to 2 business days normally, or 1 to 2 days. And they will flow through to each of the funds automatically. So you won't need to do anything extra to receive those bank transactions as the client does their normal thing with the SMSF side of things. So within the transaction list here as well, we can see the transactions that have happened. So this is just the one thing to sort of understand is that with the bank data service, it flows through to your transaction list automatically. You don't have to manually enter this in or upload a bank statement or CSV into the software. We can also see the reference number as well from here. So that's the bank reference number that we can see, and also the description as well. So depending on the bank and the description of those accounts, it will appear the same sort of description that would normally appear on the bank statement is what would also appear in the description when the transaction is imported into Simple Fund 360. So it makes that part of the process really easy and able to identify what the transactions are. So it saves you time, especially if sometimes a client doesn't give you this information, and it makes it quite tricky trying to work out what they have done. But you can see from here the description of those transactions that we can see from over here as well. So that's just a little bit about how the bank data service works. Looks like Jason and Brian have got all the questions under control at the moment with the bank data side of things. But if you do have any questions that you wanted to ask about the BGL bank data service, please pop them into the Q&A. They'll do their best to answer as many of those questions that come through as well. And I'll definitely take a look at those at the end if we've got some more common questions to address as well. But again, just touching back on this point as well. So this is looking at the BGL bank data service. So it is an additional add-on to your base license or base funds with BGL. It is an optional add-on, but as you can see, the benefits are there. So we've seen a number of clients, especially with, for example, the new rollover changes as well. So meeting that 3-day turnaround time with a rollover being processed and completed as well. So having the bank transactions within Simple Fund 360 and not having to wait for the client allows you to complete the processing of an SMSF very quickly without having to wait for information, and allows you to meet those turnarounds and timeframes as well by having a live data feed flowing through each and every day as well. Perfect. So now just a couple of things. So we're going to look at now how to import a bank statement and CSV into Simple Fund 360 at this point. Now, this is really important for clients that may not want to set up the BGL bank data service, but obviously still want to work out the best and most efficient ways of getting bank transactions into the software. And also just to reiterate again, so for bank accounts that are set up, other than the 3 banks, Macquarie, DDH, and Rabobank, the data feeds themselves will only start from the approval date. Okay, so if you set them up today and let's say the bank approves it at the end of the month, the data feeds will only start from the 1st of May 2022, not from the 1st of July last year. So it's definitely worthwhile still setting up the bank feed so that you don't have this issue this time next year, as an example. But we still need to fill that gap of the bank transactions in the current year that you are working on. So that's where the CSV and Smart Docs features are very important to use and allow you to fill that information in, as well as for clients that don't wish to subscribe for the BGL bank data service as well. Now we're going to first import a bank statement. So if your clients provide you with a bank statement directly, whether it's the original copy from their internet banking, whether they provide you with the physical mail that they have received in the post, or even taken a photo of the bank statement. If you're currently entering in those transactions, either in the transaction list or in the smart matching screen manually, you don't need to do that. There is an option to be able to import the bank transactions directly from a bank statement as well. Now, within this particular fund, so I'm going to look at first uploading a bank statement into Simple Fund 360 for a fund. I'm going to go through a bit about how that process works. And we're also going to look at importing a CSV into a fund as well. So I've just moved into a different fund over here. And we're going to look at importing a bank statement first. So I'm in the accounting menu and in the smart matching screen over here. And we can see that I've got the 3 bank accounts set up at the moment. Now we can see a little bit of the information in here as well. So we can see if the bank feeds were set up, we can see that bank balance and make sure that it reconciles with the fund in Simple Fund 360. So if I go back into our fund dashboard, you would be able to see those details here as well. So as I mentioned, the banks do send the balances as well as the transactions, and we can check to make sure that all of those details do match up over here as well. But otherwise, when we are importing the bank statement into the software, so what I'm going to do is first work on the Westpac Super Savings account that I have here. And to import the bank statement, what I'm going to do is click on the data entry and import bank statements option over here. Now, what we'll open up is our spreadsheet that we have for the data entry side of things. And this is where we can import a bank statement into Simple Fund 360. Now, in the bottom left-hand corner, we can see the plus icon and the drag and drop option to browse for files. So what we're going to do with this one is I've already taken, I've got the PDF copy of a bank statement on my computer. If you didn't have one, of the client's given you a physical copy of the bank statement, you can take a photo of the bank statement. Now, on the right-hand side of the plus icon down the bottom here, there is a QR code option. So even if you're already using the Smart Docs feature, you may not have seen this, but there is a QR code. So when I click on that, we can see that a QR code is displayed on the screen here. And if you've got, for example, a mobile phone and you're working on the fund, you can scan the QR code that is on the screen here first, and then take a photo of the bank statement from your phone, and that will upload directly into Simple Fund 360. So that saves you having to run to the scanner or the photocopier, scan the copy of the bank statement, and then having to upload it into the software. If the bank statement's in front of you, you don't need to leave your desk. You can scan this QR code and then scan a copy or a picture of the bank statement without having to leave your desk, and it will upload directly into the software from here. Now, for me, I've got the bank statement myself though on my computer, as I mentioned before. So what we would do is click on the plus icon here to upload. And then from here, I'd be able to select the PDF file for the bank account. Now I'm just going to double check because I've got two bank accounts. So I'm working on this, yep, super savings account. Okay, so it's this one over here that I've got the bank statement for. So what we do is we select the bank statement. Now you can have multiple periods of that particular bank account in the PDF file. So if you're working on 2 years and they're in the one PDF file, that is fine. This is done at a bank account level, so you wouldn't want to have different bank accounts in the same PDF because otherwise the transactions will go to the wrong bank account in the software. But as I mentioned, you can have multiple periods for the same bank account in the PDF file. Now, what happens from here is that we click on the confirm button, and Simple Fund 360 will analyze the document and produce a result with the bank transactions and a copy of the bank statement within about 30 seconds or less normally. Now we can see here on the screen, the bank statement has already been analyzed and it has determined which transactions are on the bank statement. Now we can see the transactions that are here on the left-hand side and the bank statement that I selected on the right-hand side over here. Now, if this is the first time that you have seen this screen, I'm just going to touch on some of the features and how this works. And there might be some things that if you have used the feature before, that you may not have known before as well. Now, an original copy of the bank statement is always preferred, but that's when you understand that's not always possible. So you can probably see from this bank statement that I have on the screen at the moment, it is a scanned copy. And we can see that because there's these lines and we can see the hole punch within the document as well. But that hasn't stopped the Smart Docs feature from being able to read the information on this bank statement directly. Now we can see all the information as normal on a bank statement. We can also see that I have multiple periods on this particular bank statement. So the first page, for example, shows the last quarter of the 2020 financial year. But there's transactions, for example, in the third quarter of the financial year and so on as well from here as well. Now, you may, for those of you that had a keen eye, would have also noticed is that once I do click on any of the fields here on the left-hand side within the spreadsheet where it's read the information, you can see that the bank statement is moving around on the right-hand side. Okay, so what that actually means is that if I click on any of these fields that are about to be imported into the software, it's determining where has that information been picked up from on the bank statement. So if something doesn't seem right, like an amount doesn't seem right or a description, you can click on any of these cells from the spreadsheet itself, and it will then highlight it for you on the bank statement. Now, vice versa as well. So if I was to select any of the transactions from the bank statement, it will also click on it or hover over that in the bank side on the left-hand side here directly as well. So makes it really easy. You can click on both areas and it will show you where information is getting picked up from or being translated to. Now, I guess just something else, or just something else to note is that even though this client has provided me with a scanned copy of the bank statement, I haven't sat there manually entering in this information. Simple Fund 360 and the Smart Docs feature using the technology has already worked out those details and popped it into text and processing into the descriptions here, where we don't need to re-enter any information. So all the dates, the debits and credits, all those details have already been popped in here without having to re-enter manual transactions as well. So it's why it's really important that even if you don't use the bank data service, and if the clients do provide you with a bank statement, that you do use this feature. This one is in your subscription cost at no additional charge. Okay, so for every client that has a fund on Simple Fund 360, you can upload bank statements directly as I am doing right now at no additional charge. Okay, so the bank data does have that charge, but not this particular feature. It is free. Now, a couple of other things to also note looking at this screen, if it has been the first time that you are looking at it, we can see, for example, down the bottom here, some other details about this screen. So the first one is that we can see there are 4 invalid entries. And what that means is that we can see if I scrolled here, that there's a few transactions that have a red exclamation mark, which adds up to the 4 that we can see over here as well. Now, what this means is that the entries is either missing information or they're not part of the relevant financial year. So we can see that even though this statement has transactions from the 2019 financial year, if I hover over the exclamation mark, it says that the transactions are before the system start date. That's because this is the first year that the fund is being worked on in Simple Fund 360. So the transactions relating to the 2019 financial year aren't relevant. They've been done by the previous accountant. I'm working on the 2020 financial year. Now, what I can do is click on the Clear Invalid Entries button down the bottom here. And that will then show only the ones that were valid, considered valid in here. Now, something else to also note is in the bottom right-hand corner, we can see the opening balance of the bank account in Simple Fund 360 and what that amount was, and then also see what the closing balance is as well. So from here, we can see that on the bank statement, I don't have to open it separately. The bank statement itself, on 30 June 2020, the closing balance of this particular bank account was $417,751.16. Now, what that means is that's the closing balance on the bank statement, and we obviously want to make sure that it reconciles with the data that is about to be imported. It hasn't been imported yet. It is about to be. But we can see that the amount here matches as well. So if it didn't match, you would double check to see maybe there's a transaction that has been picked up or hasn't been picked up, and work out which one that is, for example. You can see, for example, I've got a number of pages on here. They're all separated out. Like I said, the original PDF with the full year is always best, but this one's a bit of a complicated PDF document, being a scanned copy and separated periods, but that hasn't stopped Smart Docs from being able to still read the information on the screen here. But what we are looking to do is obviously make sure that the balance does match. And we do also have a almost perfect accuracy rate with being able to read the bank statements as well. And with this particular feature as well, there is a number of banks that are supported, more than the BGL Bank Data Service. We've got, I think it's over 100 banks or around 100 banks now, or bank account types, sorry, that are supported with the Smart Docs feature. So definitely try it out. If it's not supported, we can look at getting it added for you as well, with some of those smaller banks that may not have been added just yet into the service. Once the bank balance has been confirmed and we know that it is correct, we can then click on the Create button from here. And what will happen is that Simple Fund 360 will create those transactions for us and ready to process the SMSF afterwards. So again, just touching on this. So I will import a CSV file into the software shortly. We're not going to be looking at the smart matching screen today. That will be one that we do in a couple of months' time in June. The next webinar in May will look at the share data side of things and how to get share transactions into the software as efficiently as possible. This is just looking at the bank side. So it has imported these bank transactions for us. And if I go into the transaction list, I can see those bank transactions have been imported into the fund from here as well. Okay, so very similar to the bank data service, but this is a manual process, as you can tell, that I've done it for one fund, for one bank account. Doesn't have the reference number because that wasn't there on the bank statement, for example, but the description from the bank statement has still flown through. But this involves, for example, your client providing you that bank statement in a timely manner. So that's why the Be Your Bank Data Service is an automated data feed. Once the authority has been provided, no other sort of steps would be necessary to have to wait for the bank transactions to flow through. You can start doing your processing and do that on a daily basis if that's something that you do for your clients as well. Now, if I just go back into the smart matching screen over here. So I'm just going to repeat the process again. So in case you missed any of that with the bank statement side of things. So I'm just going to do it for one more bank account before I move on to a CSV. So I'm going to do it for the working account as well, Westpac working account, and then click on the data entry and import bank statements option from here. And then from here, again, what we do is click on the drag and drop or browse option. You can, if you've got a couple of screens that you're working on, or if I've got my downloads folder, for example, over here, I can drag and drop that account, the PDF file, across into Simple Fund 360. So I'm just going to drag this one and drop that one into here and then confirm. So it'll analyze that PDF document. And then within seconds, we've got bank transactions about to be imported, which would have saved us multiple hours, for example, even manually entering in those transactions or paying an additional cost to convert a PDF document. Again, this is a free feature as part of the base price for any funds that are in Simple Fund 360. So again, looking at the same example, if there's a few transactions outside of the financial year, we can see the invalid entries from here. So if I clear those invalid entries first, I can then compare and I think I've picked up, the wrong bank account in this particular example. So if I was to just go back for one moment, sorry about that. So go back into here. So our working account. It's like the one that we just worked on before by accident, but we've got our new one open here on the screen. Yeah, so we've got that bank statement open. Again, there was another scanned copy of the bank statement, but it still read all of those details in here. The main transaction is just interest paid on this one. So I can clear the invalid entries from here. And then again, just reconciling and making sure that the closing balance on the bank statement here matches what is about to be imported based on the transactions. And once it has occurred, we can click on the create button from here. And then those transactions would also be created for that particular bank account as well. So that's looking at the Smart Docs feature with importing a bank statement directly into Simple Fund 360. Now we'll have a look at importing a CSV into Simple Fund 360 as well. Now for this one, I'm using my ANZ V2 Plus account, which I'm selecting first. And then to import a CSV, there are a couple of options here. So we can use the import CSV, which we have had for a number of years as well within Simple Fund 360, or you can import it directly into this option here that we were looking at just before as well. So a lot of clients are quite familiar with how to do it from the import CSV, and you can definitely still do that from here. Just for time purposes, I'm going to use the example of doing it through the data entry screen here. Now, looking at this particular one here, so we've got the same screen that we looked at before. We're not going to drag and drop this time, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of other items in here. So within my document file here, so this is a CSV with the bank transactions in that particular file. So what I'm going to do is open up the CSV file first. And I'm just going to move that one up onto the screen here. So we can see on here, this is the CSV file that has the transactions in here. So we can see that it's already in the date, amount, and description order, which is great. Now, what I can do from here is I can, like I said before, I can either import the CSV file directly, but I'm using the spreadsheet option, which means that I simply just have to copy the bank transactions. So to do that, I've just done Control A on my keyboard, or Command A if you're using a Mac. Control A, and then Control C or Command C to copy that data. Okay, so I've just copied this one, and we can see that Excel has now copied those details across. And what we do within the spreadsheet over here is I just do Control V or Command V again, just to paste the data from what I've just copied before. So from here, we can see all of the details from here, and the details appearing on the spreadsheet over here. Now, a couple of other things just to note with this as well. So when we're importing the transactions in this screen, and even with the bank statement as well before, we are importing it from the bank's perspective. So it means, unfortunately, I guess just to confuse things around, the debits and credits are flipped when it is looking at it from a bank perspective. With this screen, we try to keep it the same way, that without having to change things around. So typically, if you're importing from a CSV or a bank statement, it would be in the bank terms. So this is looking at debits and credits in the opposite way with those transactions in here. But if you needed to swap the debits and credits for any reason so that it does come through correctly, you can just click on it from here. And that swaps those two columns around as well. Again, just making sure that those sort of balances and everything reconcile before you do import is very important. But one thing I'm going to also touch on as well is that we do also have foreign currency and support for that as well in here. Okay, so if you do have any bank accounts that do have a foreign currency, we do receive the closing rates from the RBA as part of this process. So even if you have a CSV in a foreign bank account and foreign currency, for example, if I go into US dollars, let's just say that this bank account was in US dollars, we can see those details are here. The exchange rate, which is the closing rate from the RBA directly on that particular date for the 3rd of July, 2019. That's how much one US dollar was worth in Australian dollars. And then that conversion into Australian dollars from here directly. Okay, so we can see that in Australian dollars, the 25 cents has been converted to 36 cents on that particular date using this rate in this column here. Now, if you don't want to use the RBA rates and you do have the exchange rate in your file, you can also upload that directly into Simple Fund 360. And that will also come into this column from here and import using your rate rather than the closing end of rate, which is still also valid. We do see clients use that as well, especially because there can be sometimes immaterial differences because the closing end of day rate may be slightly different as the currency fluctuates every sort of few seconds or so. So just for example purposes, I'm just going to change this back to Australian dollars, but just mentioning that the support is there for foreign bank accounts as well. So again, once this has been imported, once we've looked at the transactions and made sure that everything is entered in correctly, we can click on the Create button. Now, just to explain how this screen works a little bit more, let's say I've accidentally clicked on the Close button and I've thought I've lost all my data. I haven't. So if I go back into the Data Entry and Import Bank Statements option, my transactions that I was working on before have still been saved in here. Okay, so even if you do enter in transactions in here and maybe there's a discrepancy when you're entering this in, or you need to investigate something, or need to go to lunch, for example, that is perfectly fine. You can close your screen and come back into it. All of that data will still be saved in this screen. And then you can click on the Create button once you are ready to import those transactions into the software. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to our slides and wrap things up. We've hit the 1 hour mark exactly on point, so just perfect on timing as well. So if I just go back into here. So just to recap, so we've just gone through the BGL Bank Data Service today. We've gone through how to enter in data using the Smart Docs feature and CSV imports as well. Just going through some of the other resources that you can also access. So you do have the option to get in touch with the live support team through the live chat function. That does give you a response time within about 45 seconds or less usually. So it gives you that option there to get in touch with the BGL support team. We do have some other resources as well, such as the Learning Channel, which is available in your app switcher in Simple Fund 360. And also the BGL YouTube channel and community, where you can see past recorded webinars, and also the release notes from our product teams as well. Now, just a couple of other things as well. So within the software itself, so if you do want to access access My BGL, you can do that from your app switcher over here. This example, I don't have it right now because I don't have access myself into My BGL, but My BGL will appear here as a tile where you can complete the upgrade. If you do have access to it. If not, you can speak to your firm's account owner or administrator that manages the license and billing for your firm. If you do need to upgrade your license to have the bank data in there. And once that has been set up, you will then be able to proceed with setting up the authority forms for your clients as well. If you do have any issues with upgrading your license, feel free to also get in touch with your BGL account manager. They will also be able to assist with that part of the process as well. Now, on behalf of BGL, I just wanted to say a very big thank you for attending today's webinar. I know we've covered a lot of content and details around the bank data service and also the Smart Docs and CSV. As I mentioned before, this webinar has been recorded. You will receive a copy of the recording within a couple of days or so. But I wanted to say a very big thank you for attending. Just to reiterate again, so the next webinar that we do have will be in a couple of weeks' time on the 5th of May. So this time in 2 weeks' time. And that session will go through the share data pack, a bit about how the wraps and platforms work. So some of the ways of getting in share transactions into your software. And then following that in June, we'll look at the smart matching screen and work through processing a fund and becoming more familiar with the efficiencies behind that in Simple Fund 360. So again, once again, thank you very much. We'll leave the Q&A open for another minute or so to answer any sort of final questions. But as always, feel free to get in touch with the BGL team if you do have any questions, and we'll be more than happy to help with that as well. Thank you very much, everyone.